Hello and welcome. Tonight we're bringing you a second segment brought to you by ERIE. ERIE is a student group at the California Institute of Integral Studies. ERIE stands for Entheogenic Research, Integration, and Education. With me, I have three members of ERIE, also all students at the California Institute of Integral Studies. Here we have Adrian Auler, Veronica Hernandez, and Natalie Metz. Tonight the topic we're going to be discussing is cognitive liberty. And this is a term that's probably been used since the 60s. I believe Timothy Leary and Metzner used to talk about this back in the day. What does cognitive liberty mean to you?
Well, to me, it means the freedom to explore my own beingness. Mm-hmm. And the word cognitive has an association with the mind or the brain, but I would say consciousness in general, and the freedom to explore all the potentials that consciousness holds.
Exploring consciousness, which brings liberation. That could be cognitive, spiritual, embodied liberation.
What does cognitive liberty mean for you?
It's interesting, Larry. It ties in with the subject of integration that we were doing earlier. Culture grows by contact with other cultures and imbibing or importing concepts, ideas, and perspectives from other cultures, which enriches your own culture. So that's an integration of a larger world, a scope of ideas and ways of thinking and perceiving the world. And so what we're talking about here is the same process brought to the level of the individual human being. If we were raised in a box, we'd have exactly one way of looking at things. But because we live in a society, we have the chance to talk to other people and learn from them. And some people may propose perspectives, ideas, concepts that are alien to us, perhaps even repugnant at first. But if we are open-minded, which would certainly be a necessary feature of cognitive freedom, cognitive liberty, then we can begin to review these ideas and say, well, wait a minute now, there's something to that. And even if I don't wholeheartedly adopt this other perspective or idea, it can certainly modify my own perspective to make my way of being in the world work better for me, to make my life smoother and richer in that way. So cognitive freedom, cognitive liberty, means the freedom to change my mind in whatever way I want. People do this all the time by going to church, by reading, by going to school, by meditating in a variety of ways. Entheogens are one more route to take of opening up your mind, your heart, and taking in other perspectives, new ideas, and in the case of entheogens, sometimes perspectives and ideas that you could not normally obtain in consensual reality.
The beauty of it is that it comes from experience. I mean, entheogens have an experience of, which is very different than relating or opening your mind. Sometimes it's so hard to be able to open your mind to new ideas, or it's hard to keep yourself in a box. If you have an experience of something different, then you can start contemplating the idea of, of that difference and embracing a new paradigm. If you don't have that experience, for a lot of us, and I'm going to speak for myself, but I think all of us that use entheogens or have had experience with entheogens, it's liberating because it's an experience that only you can have and that only you can make meaning of it. And that is what to me brings cognitive liberty or any kind of liberty.
When I think myself of cognitive liberty, I'm sort of, as being a child of the 80s, I'm sort of brought back to my middle school, right? Where all of a sudden it was all about about the war against drugs and all these commercials, and somebody takes some LSD and jumps out the window, and all these problems are happening, right? And as a child, I didn't really understand this whole sort of propaganda against drugs or whatever, right? And at that point in time, I never really understood the importance of cognitive liberty, right? I was still young. I still believed that the people that were in charge had our best interests in mind, and there was a reason for them telling us these things. But as I sort of developed and got over those fears of this war on drugs, and I started to have my own experiences, I came to realize, like, wait a second, what right does any government have to put restrictions on what I do in a spiritual way or a mental way or a psychological way, or even in some ways a recreational way? You know, this is me, this is my body, this is my right to be able to do what I want with it. So it was a really interesting transition for me to go from this youthful state of like, okay, well maybe these people have, you know, maybe it's okay for the government to put laws on these types of things. And then as I developed and had these experiences, which were mind-shattering, mind-blowing, medicinal healing, and not necessarily the propaganda, scary fear tactics that I was told in middle school, it sort of changed everything. And sort of a byproduct of that, in a way, it sort of had me start to question all the other things that I was being told in the world, that these things were bad for me. It turns out, well, I found out they weren't bad for me and that they were very healing for me. So what other things am I being told by media, mainstream press, or whatever else? You were talking earlier about the waking up, you know, and how does this work? And so, like, basically, it was a really interesting development for me. And I remember my first mushroom journey ever, right? And this experience of, like, sort of reconnecting to my childhood essence, and maybe going back to that point back in the day where I was sort of not really pro medicines. And I remember thinking to myself back in the day, why would anyone want to ever take LSD? Who wants to taste purple, right? Because these are the types of things that we're fed, right? Or who wants to, you know, be jumping out windows, you know, all these types of things that happen. So how do we develop from this fear-based sort of reactionary template that's being given to us to a more, you know, explorational, experimental, and sort of healing and growing perspective, which is totally what cognitive liberty is all about, right? How do we like work with our own?
You mentioned LSD, and it's a wonderful example of a substance that has gotten quite demonized in the culture, and misperceptions have been propagated. But the original synthesizer, Albert Hofmann, accidentally had his first experience with it, and his description was that he felt like he had a memory of a mystical experience he had as a small child, around between 6 and 8 years old, I believe, where he was in the forest and he had this childlike sense of wonder and knowingness and connection with nature, is how he could describe it as an adult, reflecting. And that experience that he had as a kid, he didn't have the context maybe to describe at the time, but he knew that something mystical was going on for him, and his experience with LSD, 30, 40 years later, reawakened that experience that he had had as a child. And he was quoted on his 100th birthday for just saying how LSD really gave him insight and gave him a wonder, a sense of awe about the world. And I feel like that's one of the magical gifts of entheogens, and some things that get called psychedelic, and we can delineate that a bit more. But there's an opportunity to tap into the enchanted perspective and to see the world as ensouled and magical and mystical. And I think that's a really valuable place to consider putting some energy in our society.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's bringing magic back to the world, and those helps us remember.
What's interesting too is not, for LSD in particular, it's not even just bringing that magic, that wonder, that awe, but actually bringing magic, wonder, and awe back to brain science, because LSD helped people discover the neurochemical basis of serotonin and all these other brain chemistry that was happening. It wouldn't have happened without the discovery of LSD, because of the similarities of LSD with serotonin and schizophrenic patients, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really interesting to see that LSD not only brings magic and awe to us on a personal level, but brought magic and awe into the science community, which of course now has changed a little bit, but you know, this whole new area of study opened up, which was brain chemistry, which nobody had any idea about before, and that wouldn't have happened without the discovery of LSD. So it's really fascinating how these things have sort of weaved their way into culture and science in a way that maybe we wouldn't have expected before.
Yeah, and the elucidation of the structure of DNA is an example
Crick.
Yeah. While under the influence of LSD, he reported to have had that aha moment of this is the double helical structure of DNA. And many of the pioneers in the world of computer technology attribute some of their breakthroughs and their creativity and their problem solving to utilizing particularly LSD, but I'm sure many other substances along the way. LSD and mescaline were the ones that were actively studied during the 1960s when things were still legal and people were having amazing breakthroughs. Working with engineers in what is now known as Silicon Valley. So there's levels of potential that are untapped at this point for creativity, for problem solving, and for healing. And why don't we have the liberty to explore that? Who has the authority to say, sorry, not there and not with this?
Right, and not in your mind, right? Exactly.
And that leads directly to an important position that the Council on Spiritual Practices takes, that this is our First Amendment rights to have this individual cognitive freedom. The First Amendment, of course, talks about freedom of religion, but the word religion, it's in its Latin roots, means to connect back to, and many people, if you say religion, you think about the big organized state religions in the world, but that's not the only form of religion. There are all forms of, many forms of religion. And the point is that the point of religion is to connect back to our roots in the world. Both of you mentioned that in the particular experience you discussed, you mentioned Hoffman and you mentioned your own, remembering some important childhood experience that was important to you then that you'd completely forgotten, but now was brought forth again in a whole new context of meaning as an adult.
With the wisdom.
Exactly. So it is the position of the Council on Spiritual Practices. It's hard to ignore that the First Amendment gives us, by extension, the freedom of religion actually extends to the freedom of our individual cognitive liberty, so that we can explore our connection to the larger cosmos, to our youth, to the ground of being, to the fundamental aspects, and to the wonder of the world. When people tell me today, like, I'm bored, or everything is so humdrum, I can't even imagine what they're talking about because we're surrounded by the great mystery. Right. To think for a moment that we've got it all down, it's all been done, end of story, let me go back to work. That's such a bogus position of the prevalent worldview of reductionist materialism, that this is it. So it's far from being it. Even William James, the drug that sparked this for him was nitrous oxide. And doing that, he said, we're surrounded by a host of other realities that we're separated from only by the thinnest of veils. And entheogens help us to part those veils. And also, the concept of plant teacher says that when we take these entheogens, we can be taught something new experientially, as you were saying. Right. Not just like reading a book or going into class where somebody tells you something that you have to accept because they're an authority. Now you become the authority yourself because plant teacher directs you to have the experience through which you directly learn. This is the concept of apprenticeship. Instead of learning something in a course through a book, you actually do yourself, and you have the bodily sensations, the activities, and a mentor right there to guide you. In this case, plant teacher is the teacher, is the guide.
That's all about the relationship too between the plant teacher and yourself.
Well, it is.
Teaching is a relationship.
In the relationship with that plant teacher that you can develop your own experience and get your own answers. I mean, how many of us have had answers in entheogenic experiences that would have never even come close to incorporating or changing part of our life or part of the way we think and feel and the way we relate to the world if we didn't have those experiences? It's not about following something. It's not about belonging where it really doesn't feel like I want to belong there. And it's almost like we need to find our own meaning, our own spirituality, aside from an organized religion. great if we can relate to that, but some of us can't. Some of us, through our experience, can relate to spirit, can feel. And it's not something outside of yourself, but it's inside of you.
And I think one of the reasons that the research that's coming out of UCLA and NYU and maybe Johns Hopkins as well, treating anxiety for terminal cancer patients is really interesting, because again, they're treating a spiritual thing.
Right.
They're treating the fear of death. They're treating the fear of what's going to happen once we lose these bodies. And so that's like this really interesting space, because it's not really it's biomedical. I mean, they're treating somebody, but they're treating them for a different thing.
Right, like what we were talking earlier, is one thing is treating the symptoms, which would be anxiety, but nobody talks about death. I mean, how many of us have had an experience of, crossing over, or having an experience of closer to death, or what it feels like? So absolutely, I mean, these entheogens do help you, deal with those fears, deal with your life, and what life means. In this culture, life ends when you die. In other cultures, life never ends, and death is part of life. And then you're reborn again, or not, but it's part of life.
I definitely would say with my experiences, I have a better relationship with death now after working with these medicines than I've ever had before. And even though there's obviously this fear of the unknown still, and I don't think it'll ever go away.
Right,
there's always
it's part
going to
of
be
being
that.
human.
But there's this whole mystery that opens now. And now it's not just about, I'm afraid of dying, but like, what's going to happen?
Right.
What's next? What, so like, you're not like you're looking forward for death, but you're not so trying to hold it back.
But
You're
it's
you're there to
part.
embrace it.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
You become aware that death is not the total end of you, that there is going to be something else. You don't know what it is, so there's some trepidation, but you do know that it's not all going to come to a screeching halt. It's just going to be turn off the switch, end of story, and there's nothing. So, of course, if you think that's what's happening, that's why nobody wants to talk about death in our society, because in the materialist worldview, life is simply a chance byproduct of the chemical reactions of our material bodies. And when the body stops, life stops, and that's it, and there's no meaning. Now, for me, the entheogenic experience has greatly helped me to make meaning of life in general, the cosmos, and my life in particular. So, my experience with Ibogaine, I had to leave the country to do it, unfortunately, but I was dying of my addiction. Ibogaine, to make a long story short, not only saved me from dying, but completely reoriented me from my previous view that life sucks and then you die, to every day is a miracle. And so here it is 15 years later, and I still, every day I wake up in the morning, it's like, wow, what's going to happen today? And here I am again, and I give thanks. I have the distinct feeling that I've been saved or preserved by forces beyond myself, without getting too specific. So it's definitely an awakening, an enlivening, and a great aid to making sense of my life.
Well said.
For me too.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the conditioning we have in our society, all of us do, whether it's cultural, religion, family ties, using entheogens has helped me see what is really mine, what is from different, and what is it that I want to incorporate in my life to make my life more meaningful, the life that I feel I want to have, and I want to create. And it gives me the freedom to create the life that I want.
I noticed in specific ayahuasca journeys that I've had where, like you're saying, you sort of find out what's yours and what's not yours, and what baggage you're carrying for other people and what you're not. And it's just it's such a fascinating medicine in that it brings you back to those places. And when you're in, for example, a childhood memory or what have you, and you're in that space, and when it initially happened, you're only seeing it from your perspective.
Right.
And you go back to sort of reflect on it in an ayahuasca space, for myself at least, I can only speak for, you sort of get all the different perspectives of what was happening. You sort of can embody everything that was going on, not just your own personal egoic point of view, which may have been good or bad or what have you, but to be able to go there and to feel everybody that's there is really fascinating. I think that helps with the healing, because then you can find out, oh, maybe this wasn't mine, maybe that person's over there, and how do I sort of find me again and sort of sculpt out where I am in this memory, and how do I heal from this? So.
And sometimes you get so lost, because that's the other thing of ayahuasca, when you have, and this is when we don't have, let's say, the clarity or the distinction between what's yours and mine. Ayahuasca sometimes takes you so deep, and so deep sometimes in the, I wouldn't call it's a bad journey or a bad trip or anything like that, just extremely challenging to be able to see anything outside of the feeling of being a child and going again to that experience with such intensity that you cannot make sense of it. A lot of the times ayahuasca can do that too. So it's a matter of like set and setting, who is guiding you in that experience. It's a matter of the dose and how the ayahuasca has been prepared. It's a matter of many things in order to be able to go through that experience and make meaning of it. In my experience, that has been a difference. A lot of the times when I drink ayahuasca and I'm in a setting where I feel like I can go and just be, and then just learn to navigate that, either accompanied by someone that is sitting for me or accompanying me in there, or alone. But there's a distinction for me, especially in ayahuasca, of those two. Set and setting and dosage is very important.
Can you distinguish for people what the difference between like set and setting would be?
Well, it's yes. Let's say, and I'm going to speak just as an experience. If I were to drink ayahuasca, let's say in a set like this, with a lot of light, kind of coldness, not very comfortable, no guides, or not a community that is holding you, a community that you trust, a person that is giving you the drink, that you trust how they made the drink, and we all have a common place where we are all drinking and going into inward. That would be very challenging for me. The times that I have done ayahuasca and I have been in a place and be held by people that actually can accompany me in my internal journey, which usually is very challenging. I mean, I've not had one ayahuasca experience that didn't start with a very challenging experience. So that has made a difference for me.
Set is really about what is the intention or the mindset that you're bringing to the experience. Do you have expectations? Do you have fears? Do you have concerns? Do you trust the people that you're with? Have you, had some propaganda that's maybe scared you or fed your mind one way or another? What is the setting? What is the environment that you're actually in? Who is with you? What is the dosage of the medicine that you're taking? What is the quality of the medicine that you're taking? What physical condition are you in? There are certain entheogens that are not appropriate for certain physical conditions or maladies. There are, what's your nutritional status? What emotional things are you bringing? And then who's there with you and who's receiving you, and how are you receiving yourself on the other side of this? So are there some people that you can go home and share this experience with and have the opportunity to integrate with, or are you not going to be able to go back and do that? And how do you cradle yourself in that experience? So there's a lot of factors that come into play in terms of having an entheogenic experience and having it hopefully be as beneficial as possible for not only the individual, but the community that they're maybe experiencing it with or going back to.
Right, absolutely.
Perhaps as a thumbnail sketch, you could say that set is the internal environment and setting is the external environment. And just as in the same way as you can't cross the same river twice, because the water is constantly flowing, the same person could take the same dose of the same entheogen on 2 different days and have 2 entirely different experiences. And this is why Big Pharma can't stand entheogens,
Right.
because their
No
whole
consistency.
motif is like that you can be completely
Replicate.
predict the outcome
Right.
of
Right.
a drug. And entheogens aren't really drugs because it's completely unpredictable.
Right. And that's the beauty of it.
It's the
mystery.
beauty of it for those who are using it for the right reason. But looking from the other side of the coin, if you're stuck in that big pharma, that materialist, reductionist position, then it's horrible. All you can imagine is you're going to freak out or something terrible is going to happen, or nothing. You want a nice, predictable, logical, controllable experience. Well, so with entheogens, control is minimized and depends on a host of factors, both from the interior set and the external setting, and the community that you're doing it within, and that you can return to in order to make sense of your experience.
And in fact, in an entheogenic experience, the control is actually a hindrance, because I found, at least personally, the more I try and control my experience, the more challenging it becomes.
Right, that
And
works
it's about how do you surrender to how do you trust the self, the guides, the plant teacher, or whatever, to take you through to your experience.
And nature.
And nature.
Nature is the biggest holding.
Which,
I mean,
again,
for
brings
lots of entheogens.
who has, again, the authority not only over us, but to make plants illegal too. Like
Right.
plants that are growing out of the ground. Like
Right.
who makes those laws, right? I don't know.
Well, that again is a product of the materialist reductionist worldview. Nature is unruly,
Right.
feminine, and therefore dangerous and needs to be controlled and locked down. So they can actually do something as insane as making parts of nature illegal. And then real estate, dividing it up and saying this belongs to me and that belongs to
Right.
you, when all the Apollo astronauts who went to the moon all had the same experience when they came back and were looking at the Earth. It's like, gee, I can't see any borders from here, and the countries aren't in different colors. It's all one globe that we share together. And in fact, the entire biosphere is a very thin layer on the surface. So we need to take care of it and respect it and nurture it. So instead of being controlling nature and exploiting it and using it, we need to husband it and become gardeners and caretakers and nourish it and encourage it, because it nourishes us. Without nature, we're part of nature, but without the rest of it, we're dead meat. We're not going to last 2 seconds. So entheogens help you to attain this kind of perspective, this dissolution of structure and borders. Now we need structure, but we need to create structures for ourselves that work for us, to make us feel that we have an opportunity to express the wholeness of the human being that we are individually, and to be able to work together, instead of thinking that we're going to control everything so we know exactly what's going to happen the next day.
In relationship with the rest.
Yeah.
The rest of humans, the rest of nature, every aspect of it.
The Earth family, if you will, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Adrian Auler, Veronica Hernandez, Natalie Metz. I'm Larry Norris. We're working on a few different events this upcoming semester at the California Institute of Integral Studies. One is going to be on the function of integration. Another, we're going to have a visitor from the Native American Church who is a medicine hunter give us a little talk. And then we're going to have a women's panel as well later in the spring. Also, we have integration circles, which will be happening about twice a month. So come check us out. Our website is www.erievision.org. Thank you and good night.